All right. So yeah, social context.
No, it's a very
Or
simple concept, and I just think the term was not catchy. What I mean by social context is the provenance.
mhm.
Where was this statement made? And maybe I'm realizing social context is usually attached to an expression of a claim rather than to the claim in its full generality. We took this statement in this newscast or whatever, right? I think
Hey,
uh, Bentley asked me to develop on social context, and I just started, so I'll spend 2 minutes repeating myself. And as I'm saying, it's very simple. It's just the term I was giving to, in a way, provenance, as opposed to all these underlying assumptions we come with. Social context is saying that this, and maybe it's more about a claim statement or a claim formulation rather than the claim itself. But we took this formulation from this newscast, from this RSS feed, from wherever it came. And there is, we can infer a lot about the epistemological context that we seem to be just calling context, um, from the provenance. But it's risky inference. Like, we know the audience, for example, from the social context. The provenance tells us the audience, and of course the audience tells us something. It hints at shared presuppositions, but it's not automatic or equivocal. I know we're going to speak about context and definitions and claims. I think for me, when I hear context, I hear something very generic, such as a set of a worldview which is made of a set of presuppositions, presupposed claims, presupposed definitions, presupposed inference rules. I keep coming back to that. And so it's very vague what a context is, whereas there's specific things in the context which are not vague at all, which are, again, presupposed claims, definitions, and inference rules.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to think in my mind whether what you're pointing to is necessarily a slightly different concept than the terms and definitions that we've been using the term context for, or whether we should consider putting them within the same feature set, or are they completely different or not. So I think I understand. Yeah. So if we quote someone, or if we take a video clip, then yeah, we'd want to say the source of the video clip, and maybe even what was the event the video was taken of, right?
That's the
Because if it,
provenance.
right, yeah,
That's just history.
yeah. So is there more than provenance in your definition also?
Well, the thing, as I said, is it's only that it's indexical to the epistemological context. We, from the
how do you
audience,
define indexical?
it points to, it's like in semiotics, it's but it's true. It's not a precise pointer in this case, right? It suggests in this case. Indexical could be much more precise in other contexts, but the way I'm using it here, I'm just saying it refers to this. The problem is the context is unknowable as such. What I see as the epistemological context is unknowable. We discover it as we disagree. So I don't know if it can be modeled. And that's a big question. And that's really the big question, like this notion that we have the context in the sense of an interrelated set of elements of viewpoints, like, so interrelated set of definitions and so on. Is that something that can be modeled? Possibly, possibly not.
Here's the thing that I don't know if troubles me is the right word. Here's the thing that kind of nags at me about this type of information or knowledge. is kind of what I've said before. Is it's what I would like to render unnecessary or irrelevant to the discussion. And here's why. There's a couple of things. First of all, there's so many different thoughts and parallels. It's hard for me to choose which one. Well, one thing, actually, a question I wanted to bring up first is, I mean, an extreme example of that might be something like dog whistling, right? Where one thing is being said, but by who is being said, how they're saying it, and in what context, two different groups are understanding totally different things. So it's exactly it's the kind of phrase where you could say, yeah, the words they said are totally true. They spoke the truth, but really their base heard something totally different, which was saying something the opposite. Yeah, that's very important to understand in terms of understanding human communication and what's really being said and what's going on out there. Is that important for getting at the truth of what is being discussed or debated? It lies on the line. Well, I mean, it might be important to getting at a sociological truth about what society is seeing and thinking. But if it's about, you know, we can take the example of there are a lot of good people on both sides at that protest sort of statement. I mean, there's a debate about what was President Trump really trying to say. Fine, that's a debate you can have, but you're debating about what he's trying to say. You're not debating about the protest itself. And were there fine people on both sides of that protest? Yes, in fact, there were. I'm positive there were fine people on both sides of that protest, depending on your definition of fine, which would break out into lots of different parallel, you know, in terms of definition of context, you'd have to define what fine people means, right? So if you define it as like well-educated, ethical people, you know, according to external observation, I'm sure you could find at least one person on both sides of the protest that satisfied that criteria, right? Now, if you want to debate what he's trying to say, then you bring in arguments that discuss what, you know, the context of what, and in the context here, I do mean the sociological context, not the context elements as I define them, about, you know, why he used those words, what he meant by those words. Did he really know whether or not, but, you know, that I can only see that being captured as arguments with claims and counterclaims and all that stuff. I can't see that being captured in an element of he was trying to say this. So that, you know, in other words, the debate structure discusses that part.
That's been your contention, that any disagreement on terms or even inferred meaning can be brought into the argument realm, and if it can be said, it can be said as an argument, which I'm trying to think about that. It may be true. What is clear to me is that when we're trying to see what has been said, and I think it is a goal of the canonical debate to make sure that the claims are as unambiguous as possible. And unambiguous does mean that we agree on the meaning. And of course, that does include the denoted meaning. That does include, like the dog whistle is an excellent example. Like when the dog whistle is interpreted in two different ways by two different groups, I want to say, well, I agree with the literal meaning, but not the dog whistle meaning, for example. So it means I need to be able to distinguish those two meanings. It means I need to be able to write somewhere according to this set of definition and inferences and symbols around that statement. And this is why when you say context, I hear set of definitions or set of underlying assumptions, which are
Why don't
very
we,
modelable, which can be modeled very precisely, unlike what I call context anyway.
Yeah, we can call them definitions. I'll stop using the context word, and maybe I'll change it in the white paper or something. I'm okay with calling it definitions. There's the other
underlying assumption and inference schemes. For me, those are three elements of what I call a worldview.
All right, but underlying assumptions. What are underlying assumptions?
Underlying assumptions are implicit claims. That's fine. That's totally in your model.
Okay.
Definitions is something else, and inference schemes is something else.
To be honest, I'm not sure I totally understand inference schemes. This is something where I need to study more and I think it's very important because it's coming up. And it's something I've explicitly, I'll finish that. I think I've explicitly excluded it from the model. And in part it's because I think lay people don't understand it either. And I don't see what you gain from labeling them in terms of resolving these debates, but I'd be interested to know some more details.
Right. Go ahead.
Y'all may be coming to this point, but let me just see if I can make it explicit. Is that I think that what we should do as far as an order of discussions in the main group is to let's go ahead and either rename context or have it narrowly defined in the short term to be definitions. We'll have to clarify that. Definitions are implicit assumption. Well, so let's make it very narrow and understand that there will be these other things that we want to discuss and expand on, which is more of the provenance and the other stuff. So just kind of iterating and building as opposed to kind of discussing it all. So maybe we should break down the topic to be a little bit smaller is my thought. And maybe we should have a discussion on what those pieces should be, which is what you two are saying right now. I just kind of want to make that explicit. And make sure everyone kind of agrees with that or not.
Right. Yeah. What I'm saying is that somebody's way of interpreting a sentence does depend on their whole mind view. I had a better term than mind view, not viewpoint, but anyway, let's call it viewpoint for now.
Yeah.
This is what I would like to call.
My personal experience in debates and arguments and when things get heated and all that is the one's personal interpretation of sentences is exactly the devil that's in the details that doesn't let you get anywhere with discussion, right?
Right,
and
totally.
Yeah, and the moment you're like, oh, okay, all right, fine, I do agree that Trump's statement taken literally, that there are fine people on both sides, is correct, right? But we've accepted that debate, let's push it aside. But now let's talk about, I think he meant to say something else, and here's some context on other things that have been said in similar situations, and here's, like I find it, you actually do get somewhere when you set down definitions and you resolve the trivial discussions to focus more on,
No, absolutely.
I think we all agree definitions are important. Yeah.
You do and you don't. I mean, what does happen often in that case is that people will claim to refuse the inference and say, "Oh, that's your interpretation," yada yada yada. Which, yeah, but it's a lot of people's interpretation, so it's not invalid to bring it up.
When you get down, I mean, when you get down to it, and this is. I went through this line of thinking a long time ago with the first versions of these debates is, and to some degree, me and Bentley disagree about this conclusion, but I think I'm not sure exactly how far disagreement goes, but I came to the conclusion there's no winning debates. There's no winning. There's no finding the truth. What you get out of taking this structure as far as you can take it, what you can hope to get out of it is you realize that there's still a controversy here. You didn't get to an answer. You get to a controversy.
You get clarity.
That is suddenly, you clarified the controversy and you realize that it hinges on either what you choose to believe, when it's down to somebody's word, taking somebody's word for it, is down to, belief in something specific, or it's down to a trade-off in value. And by breaking it down and getting to that point where you've got an agreement on all the trivial stuff and you've got this fundamental disagreement still, what you've gained is an understanding of where the other person really is coming from.
Right.
You gain an understanding of the other person, right?
And that is, by the way, on the one hand, I agree totally with what you're saying. It's very rare that people convince one another through logical arguments. And in a way, the process is therapeutic in itself, in that if it's done well by people with, minimum of openness of mind and willingness to listen to someone else, what you get is mutual understanding. And even if you agree to disagree, there's at least some space. Hello.
Hello.
I don't think I know you. Maybe others do. My name is Marc-Antoine.
Yeah, hi. I'm Paul. I'm the colleague of Thomas. He cannot come this time, but I think he'll be there next time again. And yeah, I'm also in the Slack team, and yeah, I think I'll just listen a bit at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, welcome. I think he mentioned you too as somebody who can speak for him in terms of in favor of setting down milestones and not spinning our wheels, right? But yeah, right now we're still kind of debating deep conceptual.
Yeah, we're having a very meta discussion right now. We were trying to be more precise about what we mean by context and what fits in context, and we got into this meta discussion about what's the point of this all. In that, as I was saying, a lot of that is therapeutic, and it's very much in a one-to. It's in a in-person discussion, and I don't know. And I really don't know. I don't have a strong opinion either way. That's for me is an open question. How much does making this clear on an external affordance tool, document, whatever, book would be the same. How much does it help people who are not involved in the face-to-face process of resolving their difference?
So
it's
yeah,
but I think it does up to a point, and it's worthwhile doing. And but I'm just saying, this is one of my open personal anguishes.
Yeah. First of all, any response I give to that is conjecture, because we need to see it in action to have any sort of evidence as far as what would happen. Here's how I see it playing out. First of all, the point for me of CD is to get rid of anything that could be considered persuasion. In other words, trying to convince somebody, especially through the way you say things and previous understandings and letting people read between the lines and all those sorts of persuasion techniques, I want to completely eliminate. If we get to a point where we understand each other's differences and we just have to choose one value over another in terms of weighting, that's what honest decision making is about. And if we can get to that point, I think that's fantastic. Another aspect that I see in this is, there's a well-beaten or fairly well-proven I don't know what you call it, a theory or hypothesis or whatever, an effect, psychological effect, which is basically people who are more well versed in a topic when presented with evidence that contradicts their beliefs are even more likely to dig in deeper and entrench themselves, right? Because they have so many different ways to rationalize or whatever the explanation is, right? We're in a world right now.
This is why you need you need to mix experts with non-experts always.
Well, but in theory, crowdsourcing would do that, and in fact, people who are dedicated to advocates for issues are the ones who will be there fighting tooth and nail, putting out all the information. So you should get experts involved more even than non-experts, right?
What I'm saying is you need the mix.
You need the mix. But so let's take this factor that people who are even more well-versed in a topic become even further entrenched when confronted with opposing evidence, right?
Yep.
That also implies, on the other hand, that people who are encountering a controversial topic for the first time are more open-minded, right? Especially if it doesn't come from a context that is part of your definition of who you are and all that, right? Right now we live in a world where
that's the modern problem, isn't it? Everything gets politicized, everything gets polarized and tribalized.
Another way to put it, though, is that your first encounter with most things these days is within a tribalized context.
True.
And in a situation where you don't have everything even on the balance, you don't have all the information there balanced out in a non-political manner. So contrast that with what the CD aims to do, which is your first contact with the information. If you're like Wikipedia, it's common knowledge. You go there first. Oh, there's this topic that people are debating about. I'm going to go to the canonical debate and see what it's all about.
Yeah.
I see that as being an improvement in terms of our state of affairs, right? In a lot of different ways, but
we'll need good filters, because there's no question that there's space for attacks there. But I still think it's worthwhile. Listen, I'm as committed to the project as you are. I think that we cannot totally abstract away what you call the persuasion context. I think that I don't believe in neutral point of view. I'll put it another way. I believe in showing both point of views on the same map as honestly as possible. I think that can be done, or both, or as many as there are. But I think that neutrality, of course, on the one hand, it's something we ought to aspire to asymptotically. But on the other hand, there's something a bit like pretending you're neutral can be it's never fully true, and it can be misleading. I'd rather say we're trying to represent all points of view with as honestly as we can, which is a very different statement than saying we have the neutral truth. You see what I'm saying?
No, I understand, and the idea, more and more, this to me is an information architecture problem and solution, right? And so the goal is not to have it perfect. The goal is to create a structure that, if you pour a bunch of debates on top, should filter things out in as an ideal way as possible, right? But absolutely, the idea from the beginning has been get everybody to participate, which means let trolls come in or whoever and say things however they want. The idea is to create a structure and a process that slowly teases out those elements, because if you can say things however you want, there is a more neutral way to say it. And like Wikipedia does with weasel words, right? You know about weasel words in Wikipedia?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
they
clearly
have
useful.
standards for the platform, right? That whenever somebody starts saying things, oh yeah, most people agree that, right? Oh, that's
Statistics.
not an accepted formulation here in Wikipedia. We're going to flag that, and somebody come in and show some evidence and say.
But that's a very good. Let's get into that, because now we're speaking very abstractly, and let's speak about mechanics here. We agreed that there would be multiple formulations for a given claim. Is that right?
I don't know if that's no, we didn't agree that. I didn't agree to that. But
So good thing I checked.
Let me just say that, like, I'm not against it, but I would want to see the proposals for how it's to be done, because you have maybe infinite possibilities then. One of the things mentioned in the white paper is maybe even having some sort of emotional thermometer, where you could kind of turn it up to more controversial forms of speech in the same debate. I don't know if that would actually work in a fluid way. The Great American Debate, Jamie's project, is definitely doing that. She's pointing at all examples of a claim that she's found in documents.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was agreed upon, because I know Jamie's doing it.
Right. I
don't
know if it's a fundamental element.
No, but that's a very good question, because on the one hand, I think sometimes you want to have the formulation, the formulation from as said by the claims advocates, and probably also the formulation as said by the claims detractors. You probably need both. Why? As a way to do unification. Like if you have somebody else with a new claim and you want to know, is this something that's been said before? Well, you want to have this bank of different formulations, including very loaded ones, to know that, hey, yes, this is this claim.
Right. I have a problem with that, though, and it's a very practical problem, which is I don't see claims on Twitter. When I go to Twitter, I don't ever see claims. I see, for example, there are lots of good people on both sides of the protest. What claim is that? What claim is
a claim? It is many claims, and that's the thing. The claims are never. Let me reformulate that, and I'm not sure you'll agree with that reformulation, but that's exactly the game of argument. There's never any pure claim on Twitter. You always have sentences.
Not only that, but you have you'll see several implied claims and nothing actually said, right? Especially if you take a joke, humor, comedy. So many, like 90% of Ann Coulter's statements are claims without being claims that are jokes.
Absolutely.
And you can't really pin it down to her saying
yeah.
Right?
Exactly. So, and this is why, I mean, in the practice of conversation mapping, which has been one of the most successful practices to resolve arguments, because the reality is, on the one hand, I agree that nobody's ever persuaded by intellectual argumentation beyond a point, but I do also see that mediators and good mediators do manage to get parties to agree and find agreement point. It can be done. It's a slow and therapeutic effect rather than a purely rational one, but agreement can be forged by skilled practitioners. And if you look at one of those practices, which is conversation mapping, the thing that was very important was to externalize the contentious proposals. In this case, they weren't claims as such, they were proposals. Here's the problems. Here's oh, that's what your problem is really is. I didn't know that. So externalizing it helps people become aware of one another's problems. So that's one good thing. But the other good thing is externalizing the proposals forced both parties to agree on a more neutral, but mostly checking. Is this really what you said? And in a dialogue, you can do that. And I think for me, if the whatever mechanism we build doesn't allow people to negotiate intended meaning, we're failing. And this is why taking claims purely abstractly,
So
I don't believe in.
yeah,
We
so
have
so
to
but
have this
like
platform where we negotiate. Is that what you mean? Yeah, is that what I meant? I interpret that. Is that really what you meant? No, I meant this instead. Oh,
yeah, I don't want to build a tool to do that for them. I think mediation and agreement,
do that for
working out
them,
less
or allow them to do it using the tool. That's very different.
okay, but right, exactly. I would want my vision for the canonical debate tool is when people are working this thing out. First of all, it's not between two people, the canonical debate. It's canonical. It's right. Now, when you start saying, no,
It's
no, no,
called
but here's
extrapolation.
my actual problem is, okay, let's take the protest now about, black people are being suspected, innocent black people are being suspected of crimes and killed without even having a chance in way more disproportionate numbers than Caucasians, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole why are you taking a knee thing and all that, right? There's no problem. The American, whatever. No, here's my problem. Boom. And all you got to do is point to that one claim right there in the canonical debate. And you don't have to spend the next 2 hours discussing, oh, no, that's fake. That's true. No, that's fake. No, that's true. No, that's fake, right? That's the point. Look, here's my problem. I'm trying to highlight this issue. If you don't believe it, go and look. That's why I'm taking the knee, okay? No, but you should be American and support the flag and everything. Oh, no. Protesting in public is a very American value. Boop, there's a debate. Go. And you're done. You don't have to waste your time with them anymore, going back and forth with people being intentionally obtuse, right? And that's what I don't want is people trying to get rid of intentional obtuseness.
No, that is very clear. But what I'm saying is there is such a thing as unintentional obtuseness, and I think it is important to be able to, like, if people doesn't understand something as formulated, taking time to fill out the claims description so it's clear to people who may lack requisite background. I think for me
No,
that's part of the
exactly.
goal.
That is definitely part of the goal.
And that's what I meant by negotiate the formulation and negotiate the intended meaning of the formulation. I agree, it's not between two people ideally, but I mean, it's always individual human beings who argue. We want it to scale up and be useful to more than those people who participate in the arguing. That's the whole point. But
but definitions, right? Definitions plus claims and arguments, I think solves that issue because, oh, you thought I said this? No. This is exactly what I meant, right? And that's exactly the same thing of like trying to get President Trump to come out and state plainly that he doesn't support the activities, say, of what is it, white supremacy, right? No. People think you said you were saying they were good people. So we want you to come out and state very publicly that you don't think they're good people, right?
Won't happen,
You
but
may
yes.
think that other people, but that's what people are getting at when they're trying to hold his feet to the fire for that statement is literally, I want an explicit statement that you agree with this claim. I don't, whatever else you said, we just want you to clarify that wasn't the claim you were making and that you, right? And you won't do it. Okay, then you're not going to do it. But there it is right there. Vote in favor of that claim or don't publicly. That's what we want.
No, I agree. No, but and all I'm saying is, again, the claim as written will not be clear exactly the first time around. And that was one of the questions we had at the end of the last Hangout notes. Things to do next time is in-depth look at a user story of how uncovered ambiguity is resolved by a user wanting to contribute an argument to an existing argument map, starting from a claim which has no context defined. So what do? You encounter this claim. Oh, does it mean this or that? Because if it means this, I agree. If it means that, I disagree. How do I concretely interact with the tool to say, well, let's clarify this claim because there's
So
multiple
you would do
interpretations
it
by,
right. And so, you would do it exactly by saying, okay, I'm going to append these definitions to this one. And I'm going to make a copy of it with the other version, right?
Yeah. So what you need to do is to be able to say, unclear as stated, here are two more precise versions. And people who have voted, because people may have voted, should consider choosing which version they agree with, and maybe both.
Right, and the mechanism right there for now would be, like in my mind, is wipe out previous votes and notify everybody that things changed and you have to go re-interact with it, right?
Yeah. It will be annoying in practice, but it's necessary.
Yeah, the problem is I see that as being hard. I don't see that as scaling. I think there's going to be so many instances of that and impacting so many people. Everybody's going to get tired of it. So I don't know how to solve that problem.
And as I said, I mean, we should always ask about any feature. Can this be used as a manipulation mechanism? And in this case, clearly yes. If there's somebody I don't agree with, I can introduce nitpicky, stupid distinctions to wipe out the vote. I don't think wipe out the vote is the right answer. Like, propose to reconsider the vote given the distinction, but I wouldn't wipe it out, if only as a way to avoid it as a vector of attack, because attacks will happen.
Right. And that brings in the question again of centralization versus crowdsourcing of curation, and if, what's better, what works better, what's going to scale better, what protects better. Yeah. Well, okay, rolling back, can you give me a quick lesson on inference?
Inference schemes, absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing we had determined last time is it's mostly about relevance, and I think that's a good intuition. When rhetoric has all this history of having studied inference schemes, they were called rhetorical tropes, and I have two textbooks to talk about inference schemes. One, of course, is Walton, and Walton is all this classification. But the other one that inspired me a lot is a classical rhetorician called Marc Angenot. And Angenot was working on pamphlets and political speech a lot. And he said, if you look at political speech, first he went through all the classic rhetorical forms, and he said most of them are heuristic. Most of them that are said to be sophistic, that are invalid inference schemes. If you say this and that leads to that, that's invalid. Well, most of them are actually not invalid, but heuristic. There's a very few valid schemes, but their realm of applicability is actually very small. So you have to use heuristics some of the time, because you rarely have enough data to apply the pure absolute logic inference rules. And when you do heuristics, of course, heuristics may work or fail. And furthermore, certain heuristics are
taking a step back to the very beginning. Like, the definition of inference scheme would be like the mechanism by which an argument attaches to the claim it's targeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in this set of inference schemes are the set of logical fallacies and logical correct references, correct uses of logic, right?
And the debatable, and that was Angeno's point. I think it's very important. And the point of debatable relevance. Like sometimes the inference is, the relevance is clearly right, sometimes it's clearly wrong, but often the relevance can be debated.
Right,
And
like that was an ad hominem attack, and you say, yeah, but we're debating whether or not he's a good authority on this. Or something. It's like, yeah, it was ad hominem, but that was the point of the debate. Right?
Argument of authority can be valid.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, the examples he gave, and I do want to run through the examples because it goes fast, and I think they're extremely illuminating. One example he gives is slippery slope. He said most conservatives will use the slippery slope argument, saying, you know, oh, if we allow this, then that will happen, that will happen, that will happen. And sometimes things go from one to the other, sometimes they don't. And it's very ad hoc.
Right, you could actually counter the relevance of that by saying, you know, something like this plan puts specifically a check at X point to reevaluate, right? So yeah,
right.
It's a slippery slope, but we put brakes at a certain point. So
yeah,
you know.
No, exactly. But we need to be very explicit that when there's a slippery slope argument, it's not necessarily valid or invalid. It requires more context. But the point is, certain communities see this argument as, I've made that argument, it's valid, it's relevant, and others say, what are you saying? That's bullshit. And they're both right, both wrong. So that was example one. Example two is in the communist anarchist communities. This society is bad, so the good society must be the exact opposite. So if you say this applies to this society, so we must do it's a reason to do the opposite, which is, of course, simplistic, and of course, sometimes appropriate. Third example was he called it, trying to remember, the technocratic argument, saying, oh, if this could work, it would have been tried. Or it would have worked before, which is, of course, an argument that kills any innovation. Now, of course, in some cases, it's true. And the fourth one is the conspiracy theory is, if there's no proof, it's because the proof was suppressed. And sometimes for conspiracy theorists, showing that there is no proof is worth a proof. That one is pretty much universally bad. Right. But sometimes there are conspiracies. It happens.
So my understanding then, you want to say something, Go?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that fits for almost all lists of kind of logical fallacies. Almost all.
Yes. Exactly, they're heuristics. They're not inherent.
So the informal logical fallacies, right? Formal ones are more,
right.
Black and white.
Maybe his book works through all formal logical fallacies and shows cases where they're valid. Okay. The book is worth reading.
Okay.
Unfortunately, in French.
Yeah. My understanding then is that as far as inference schemes go, this is supported by the white paper design through arguments against arguments. And since you have canonical claims, right? Each of the logical fallacies themselves would become a claim that would be reused over and over again. So like this is an appeal to authority, and an appeal to authority is invalid, right? Although this is an appeal to authority, it would be appeal to authority is a logical fallacy. It would be something like that. I'm not sure how it would be structured, but the point is it would be reused over and over again. So these inference schemes would appear essentially as claims used as arguments against or for supporting arguments.
But I think we went through that, but you do distinguish between refusing the argument versus refusing the claim versus refusing the claim's relevance. These are distinct operations.
Yeah, claims don't have relevance. Claims are,
but
exactly. The used as an argument.
When used as an argument, but that's what I'm saying. Attacking the claim itself is independent from attacking whether the claim is relevant as a counter argument, and those are distinguished.
Yeah, and the way
That's
it's done
important.
is, yeah, if an argument is targeting a claim, then it's targeting the truth of the claim. If it wants to target relevance, then it's actually targeting an argument that is being used to support or attack a claim. That's the way it works.
What you call argument is actually a claim application.
What is that?
What you call an argument is actually a claim application. It's applying a claim as
exactly.
pro or con.
Yeah, it's using a claim
between
to support or yeah, exactly. Yeah, which
let
creates
me,
a graph, right?
It's a generalized graph because you can have edges pointing to edges. It's not a graph.
Right. Well, it depends on how you model, right? Because if you model arguments as nodes, then you have two different kinds of nodes, and then
so just to kind of keep us focused, we've got about 15 minutes left. I would like to propose that I don't know if we hit the suggestions from last meeting for the next meeting yet, but I wanted to kind of suggest kind of a focus, kind of like I said before, is that we narrow down the context discussion to just definitions and try and solve this before going in deeper into these. But also maybe for the rest of this meeting, do we want to list any others out? And is this the right wording, or is that misleading? And is that the direction we want to go? So people can say, no, I want to solve all of these before we start having any sort of agreements.
Yeah, tree bothers me a bit because it assumes a tree-like ontology. It could be a graph. What's in a definition? It's a good question. But otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to implement definitions. Obviously, the debate map implements them just as unrelated terms, and possibly they're only they kind of have a local scope somehow. I'm not sure how he manages the scope, but anyway, I mean, there are different ways to implement it. Knowledge graph is the white paper model for that, and actually its model is probably, I would say it has to be both internal and external. I don't know if that's a 3, but yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to do that. I think that will be our thing, is it will be an internal one with external links. I think we've kind of found out we have to do that because none of the knowledge graphs include everything we need.
Right.
So maybe we don't even need to discuss. We can just put that as agreement. Although I guess, yeah, I mean, in Reason Score, I'm implementing definitions as in a hyperlink in the claim. I'm having definitions in there solving the issue of ambiguity, but not solving any of the other issues that having a knowledge graph or any sort of links does. So
right,
I'm saving that for
debate
later.
map does that too. Yeah, it's just a flat list.
So I guess really kind of the discussion is having it be able to be data that's tied together without using some natural language processing or some sort of mining. Is that a requirement in our core system? And maybe we should start focusing on what's discussing about our core database or our core API or whatever it is we're building.
To me, it's required
as external to the.
What do you mean not using NLP, which I would agree, but I want to be sure we mean the same thing.
Well, I think it means relying 100% on natural language processing, right?
Well, no, I'm just saying in the Reason Score system, there's no structure. I'm giving them a markdown in the claim text, and thus when you need a definition, you link to something or you make it an expandable thing. So there's no data structure to it.
Data structure, I get it. Yeah,
right. Really, that's what I meant. There's no data structure to my solution, and that for me is sufficient. So the question is, are we requiring even without a knowledge graph. I mean, so yeah, what is our minimum MVP, our minimum viable feature
Okay.
that we want to do
Yeah,
in
I
our
mean,
system?
this gets to a bunch of questions we need to answer ahead of time, which is what is the goal of the canonical debate? What is what are we trying to achieve? What is an MVP for what? Right. So to say something is fully canonical debate white paper compliant is maybe what we're saying, right? Then and that doesn't have any requirements on actual data modeling structure, but it's implied that if you're going to have a knowledge graph implementation of definitions, you're going to have all these features that are supported by the definition, then you probably need to have an internal database, right?
I would like to back off a bit. One thing that's and tie it to the how do we deal with a claim that has no context, or in other words, no definition? I mean, if you put the pointers to the definition in the markdown, for example, that means that introducing a definition for another term in the statement is editing the markdown. And I'm not sure that's the best way to go that way, because I think it's important to be able to say a posteriori, hey, that term, which was not defined at the time of statement recording, because it's a barrier to entry to record, to define every term, A, because we didn't think it was necessary, B. Now we realize that this term is ambiguous and we need to be more precise about it and introduce this distinction we were talking about. So I think it's important to be able to introduce these distinctions a posteriori, which is why I would hesitate to do it in the markdown.
Yeah, so
I mean, I would contend that you have to, is that, like you said, the discussion is negotiating the whole thing. So I don't think there's a way of getting around having to edit the actual content of the.
Yeah, I wouldn't be so concerned about that question. It's more a question of, a more fundamental question is, should all definitions be required at the time you're creating a claim, right? If the answer is no, then you got to figure out mechanisms for doing it, right? But yeah, I don't think I think we all agree that we need to allow people to put in their claims as quickly as possible, as easily, with as little expertise as possible, and allow a structure that cleans that up, right? So we're all on the same page there. Then it's a question of UI of how to go about doing it. But I think that's a requirement we could put.
So yeah, so I see the main difference. I mean, to Mark's point, there is a benefit in that you can be adding definition if you're doing it in some sort of knowledge graph. You can be adding definitions without editing the text. That to me, that's not that important, because I think we have to solve editing the text. But the second difference is the benefit of putting an external knowledge graph is all the other benefits from that, which is more automatedly looking for duplications and more automatedly organizing claims within the same thought space, which all has value. Just the question is, do we want to spend all our time right now getting those features in, or save them for later? I guess maybe I'm arguing for, let's discuss what our minimum viable first product is.
Okay, I mean, what I would say about minimum viable, I mean, for one thing, you have Stephen doing lots of experiments on user experience, and he wants to study them in a formal, organized fashion. So his MVPs are very different from what I would consider the canonical debate MVP. So for his purposes, we don't have to do that. For what I would consider to be I
guess I'm discussing the central
version.
API.
Yeah.
Yeah, not even the UI, but
API.
just the database and API. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do we want to
or
build it with
MVP.
without the knowledge graph and then add it, or do we want to make that a first feature?
I would say that an MVP for the canonical debate has to be better, more functional than Chialo, because if it's not, we're not adding anything to the state of the art. This is why, to me, having the knowledge graph features is a critical part of it. I don't mean all the features, like we don't have to have complete knowledge graph navigation and that sort of thing, but we need to have definitions to the point they refer to external or objective definitions reused, right, that are available out there. You need to be able to.
Certainly, I've been proposing doing a lot of things ad hoc, in the sense we discover that this is ambiguous, let's branch it at that moment instead of doing it upfront. I think we could have that approach to knowledge graph. That is, we introduce definitions one by one and assemble them one by one instead of trying to have the perfect knowledge graph up front. I don't believe in perfect knowledge graph ever existing, frankly. It's always asymptotic. Pointing to existing stuff is useful, pointing to either Wikidata or the Wikipedia concepts is totally useful and relevant. It won't always solve ambiguity, but it will in some cases. There's something very pragmatic about doing that. But basically what I'm saying is trying to have the whole knowledge graph machinery is a huge thing. Trying to be able to do knowledge nuggets that aggregate to existing knowledge graph and can have knowledge graph interactions between them can be done in a reasonable amount of time. That's my.
One question. Do you have some contacts to groups that are interested in using the tool? Because I think this would really also be helpful when we have some minimum viable product, that there are people already testing it and trying it, because otherwise it's always a bit artificial to, even with the minimum viable product, to find out what works and what doesn't work in practice.
We have the Great American Debate is a partner organization, and they're focused specifically on, they were focused on the climate change debate and now are doing COVID mapping, COVID debate mapping. And they right now are using Debate Map, which is one of our member sites. So they would, if we improve on Debate Map, they would, I'm sure, be happy to switch over if we help them do that, because we're also developing for them. So, so that's one thing. Our friend, what's his name, Joe? I'm not remembering his name now. I have to go look again. Anyway, has been working on his system. I don't think he would want to switch over because he's put a lot into his system, but he's doing a lot to get prominent figures in debates involved. I've personally thought that the best strategy to getting this sort of thing, James, thank you, getting this sort of thing off the ground is exactly trying to pick very controversial topics that have activists dedicated on both sides to pit one against the other, because that's where you're really going to be able to get a lot of information and make an impact. It's hard because you have to get people to think it's worth their time, right? That is a big challenge. That's the cart before the horse issue, or the chicken and the egg issue of any marketplace. And Chialo suffers from that, I think, because it's not canonical. And to me, the definition of what makes it worth your time is that it's canonical and you know your information isn't just going to go out there and then disappear, right? You're actually adding something to the future of mankind, which is what Wikipedia managed to achieve, right? But that's, you know, that's a long-winded answer, and we're running out of time. So we've thought about it, but I think it's an excellent point.
Okay. Can I say one last thing to open up the conversation before we close? I'm channeling Jack here. Jack's been very upset whenever I speak about argument mapping. And he says, arguments, they're pissing context, they're not useful, blah, blah, blah. And basically he's saying any representation of debate that's in terms of for, against, and doesn't include opening up to a new question is increasing antagonism rather than helping people understand one another. And when we're speaking about this problem of adding context or adding definitions, a lot of time it will come in the terms of, it should come in the forms of question. Saying, is this what you mean? Or do you mean this or that? Or, you know, are we clear about this? It can be very open-ended. And of course, such questions have to be resolved, but I think it has to be part of the UX at a very deep level. It's a user task to say, I'm not clear about this, and this needs to be clarified.
So that is an extremely good point. And I agree with you, and I don't have a good solution for that. So I'm going to have to think through that. This is one of those points where I think you're absolutely right, and I don't know how to do that, except, you know, making people specify their context, right, might be a way. But it seems more like, you know, a curator.
I think
comes
questions are a first-class object.
So I have an idea that might be a good point, and we should explore that. I have one element that's in the white paper, is a like a placeholder for a claim, which is a question, which is like I'll do this a lot when I'm trying to map out a debate. Is like, okay, what they're saying is that banning abortions leads to an increase in death to young women performing their own home abortions, right? And so, like, mapping this out, I know that's an argument, but that's where my information ends. So I'm mapping it out. I would want to put a placeholder and say, hey, all you people who are experts on this subject, what is the stat here? I called it an RFI, request for information. So the question is there a similar concept, yeah, for definition, right?
It is different, yeah. Asking for evidence versus asking for clarification are slightly distinct. I don't know if the distinction is important. I think it is. I'm not sure. But,
I think it's important, but I think it's analogous. I think there's a certain definite distinction.
I missed. What was the word other than clarifying? What was the other thing?
Asking for evidence. If you want evidence on a certain claim, like you have a claim or even you have a hunch, I think this is true. Is there evidence, even one way or another? That's the question is well posed. We know the space, but we don't know the answer. Like, we think a certain percentage of people are affected by this. What is the percentage? I don't know what it is. There has to be a percentage. We don't know what it is. That's a request for specific information. Or sometimes we have the percentage, but we need the evidence. And sometimes we don't understand the question. That's a totally different thing. Or we don't understand the claim. That's a totally different thing, because we don't know what the terms
are.
But
how does that happen? This would happen with somebody putting out a claim but not attaching context, and somebody coming across the claim and being like, what did you mean by this? Is that the situation? Yeah. So the original author is not there.
Yeah. So do we mean this or do we mean that? And sometimes everybody will say, oh, it's obvious to me that it's that and not this. Okay, cool. we agree that this is what it is. The community has spoken. And sometimes, as I know, there are people thinking it's this, people thinking it's that. Let's fork the claim.
This is like straw manning versus steel manning, right? Without clarification, you could be arguing by thinking the worst case, they meant the worst thing, and by
yeah, absolutely. It's certainly an obstacle to Gracie and charity.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to see in practice, because all my mapping's been me on my own. Every once in a while, somebody else will add something to the map, but it's going to be a very different situation, like you're saying, when a bunch of people are putting information and then curators are kind of running after them, trying to clean up the mess. And this will happen.
Anyway,
I
this
have
is
to
an
see
indication.
how I wanted to resolve it. Yeah.
This is an indication to the curators that something needs to be clarified.
Yeah, it could be as simple as that. It could be as simple as, author, please define context, which means maybe it would want to propose different options for context. And if they choose both options, it splits out into two separate, right? This doesn't sound like an MVP feature. Maybe notifying that it needs clarification could be an MVP feature, whereas, tagging with proposed context and all that stuff is later on. I see it as being very useful. I don't know if it's MVP.
I think that being able to say that something is unclear versus making a claim, it's very different, but it's more humble, and it's a way to diffuse antagonism. It's about saying, listen, and this is not about lack of clarity. This is, we don't know about this. Very clear question. We know what we mean, but we don't know about the impact of this on that. Like, right. You propose this,
like I can see
it's
the
going to be good for
that
this, bad for that. But yeah. And that's another case where the question as a first-class object changes the dynamic.
Okay, so we're over time. People are, we can go long if people want, or we can shut it down.
I have to go to work, but I'm happy to stay on.
We probably should go ahead.
I think we have done a bit of work. I'm happy to call it a day. Either way.
Here's a question for MVP, and I think it's not an MVP. This is an advanced feature, I think, so it's not an MVP. But I would want to try to implement the one. No, well, I don't know. MVP should have scoring. MVP should have roll-up scoring. That's what I think. I was going to say the one account per human, but that's not MVP. We can't get there on an MVP. But I think we need roll-up scoring with more than one scoring algorithm.
I think what's really important is to be able to identify proposals or claims. I call them proposals. I distinguish proposals and claims, but claims that are under attack by an argument that itself is not under attack. So basically, a claim that is contested and nobody's answered to the counter. And it's not about the numbers. It's nobody's answered to that. Until we do, this claim is just under attack, period. I think that's more important than the numbers, but the numbers are useful too.
Well, but so like claims that are not under attack could be axioms, right? So it's hard to do that.
Or they could be
No, but like when you, in the scoring mechanism I designed, when you create a claim, it's 50% true, right, or accepted. So in order for it to go beyond that, you would need lots of voting to support it. There needs to be kind of a weighting in there. I don't know. But
if I can make a suggestion, make sure that the scoring and voting mechanisms are extremely modular, because there's so many ways to design that.
That's the idea. That's what I meant by roll-up scoring with multiple methods of scoring. The idea is to create it modular. I would want it so that academics could try out their own algorithms on it.
Yes. It's important.
So how about, I mean, we'll discuss the topics for the next meeting in the Slack channel probably, but I'm going to propose working on an MVP feature list for our shared central database API.
The other thing I would like to propose, just to throw it on the list here, is MVP needs to have 100% history auditing. Until you have that, you're not, you know, it is a total rewrite to support that after the fact. So if it's intended to be the canonical debate database, it needs to support that.
I'm working on making all my database work in the event sourcing.
Yeah. All right. Well, then I'll go ahead and stop the video and we'll meet next week.
Yeah. Okay.
Where is the stop video?
All right, Paul, good to meet you.